The warning light on the dashboard was not a steady, urgent red. It was a flickering, lazy amber that suggested the sensor array was simply too tired to care anymore. Cale slammed the heel of his gloved hand against the battered plastic console. The light sputtered once, flared bright, and then died completely. Percussive maintenance. It was the only kind of repair Cale could afford these days. He leaned back in the pilot's seat, the worn leather creaking in protest under his flight suit. Outside the thick, scratched glass teal of the viewport, the universe was a graveyard. He was drifting through the ghost belt, a massive debris field orbiting a forgotten desert moon in the outer rim. It was a place where massive hulls of ancient destroyers floated in silent, tumbling agony, their metal skeletons picked clean by 3 generations of scavengers. System. Give me a vector on that magnetic anomaly, Cale said, his voice rasping with the dryness of recycled air. The ship's AI, a patchwork of salvaged code he had nicknamed Bucket, chirped with a sound that resembled a wet cough. Unable to comply, Bucket's synthesized voice replied. It sounded like a monotone butler speaking through a broken radio. Interference levels are at 80%. Sensors are confused. I am confused. We should leave. Cale rubbed his eyes. He was 35 years old, but in the harsh lighting of the cockpit, with the gray creeping into his stubble and the scar running from his ear to his jaw, he looked 50. We are not leaving until we find something worth more than a hot meal, Cale muttered. He pushed the throttle forward gently. The thrusters of his ship, the Vulture, kicked the vessel through a cloud of frozen coolant crystals. They pinged against the hull like hail. Kyle had not always been a garbage man in space. 10 years ago, he had worn a uniform that commanded respect. He had been a lieutenant in the Coalition Navy, flying sleek interceptors that smelled of new polymers and victory. Then came the order at the Aurelius colony. Burn it, the admiral had said. There are insurgents in the population. Burn it all. Cale had looked at the heat signatures. Thousands of civilians, families, children. He had refused. He had jammed the comms of his squadron to prevent the order from going out. For his trouble, he had been court-martialed, stripped of his rank, and dishonorably discharged. Now, the only thing he commanded was a ship held together by duct tape and bad luck, and his only mission was finding enough scrap copper to keep his oxygen scrubbers running for another week. I am detecting a signal, Bucket announced, interrupting Cale's brooding. Cale sat up straighter. Is it a patrol drone? Negative. The frequency is archaic. It is a distress beacon, Bucket said. But the encryption is strange. It matches the Zephyrian Dominion war codes. Cale frowned. The Dominion? That empire dissolved 2 centuries ago. That is why it is strange, Bucket noted helpfully. Kyle brought the navigation scope up. A faint, pulsing dot appeared on the grid, originating from the surface of the moon below. The moon was a desolate hellscape, a ball of rock that had been glassed by orbital plasma fire during the Great War. No one went down there. The radiation was low enough to survive now, but the terrain was a nightmare of razor-sharp dunes and intense atmospheric heat. Old ghosts do not pay well, Kyle said, debating with himself. It is probably just an automated loop from a dead bunker. Analysis indicates the signal strength is degrading, Bucket said. It was activated recently. Curiosity, that old and fatal flaw, tugged at Cale's gut. If it was a Dominion beacon, there might be Dominion tech, high-grade alloys, preservation pods, things that collectors in the core systems would pay a fortune to own. And if someone had activated it recently, maybe there was a survivor. Kale looked at his fuel gauge. He had enough to land and take off, with a margin of error that would make a safety inspector weep. He sighed, flipping the master arming switch for the landing sequence. "If we die down there, I am blaming you," Kale told the dashboard. "I have no money to pay a fine, so blame is irrelevant." Bucket replied. Kale guided the Vulture into a steep descent. The debris field thinned out as they hit the upper atmosphere. Turbulence hammered the ship immediately. The hull groaned, a terrifying sound of metal under stress, as the heat shields flared orange. Below them, the moon expanded. It was not the soft beige of a sandy desert. It was a blinding, shimmering white. The sand here was silica glass, fused by the heat of ancient weapons. It looked like a sea of diamonds and knives. The instruments on the control panel flickered again. This time, it was not just a loose wire. The numbers on the altimeter scrambled, reading 0, then 10,000, then negative numbers. "System, stabilize the horizon," Kale ordered, gripping the yoke with both hands. "I am trying," Bucket whined. "There is magnetic interference. Something down there is scattering my brain." Kale fought the drift. The ship wanted to roll over and smash into the glittering dunes. He feathered the retro thrusters, forcing the nose up. A massive skeletal shape protruded from the sand ahead, the ribcage of a crashed dreadnought, buried for hundreds of years. Aiming for the shadow of the wreck, Kale yelled. He slammed the landing gear lever down. One leg locked, the other hesitated. The ship hit the ground hard. The impact jarred Kale's teeth in his skull. The Vulture skidded across the glass sand, sparks showering like fireworks, before crunching to a halt in the shade of the giant metal ribs. Silence rushed back in, ringing in Kale's ears. "Status?" Kale asked, checking his limbs for brakes. "Hull integrity at 90%. Bucket reported. Landing gear is damaged. We are stuck. But we are alive." "Vacation spots," Kyle muttered, unbuckling his harness. "I always pick the best ones." He moved to the locker at the back of the cramped cockpit and pulled out his survival suit. It was a heavy insulated rig designed to withstand extreme heat and mild radiation. He checked the charge on his rifle, a magnetic rail driver that had seen better days, and slapped a fresh power cell into the receiver. "Keep the engines on standby," Kale ordered. "If I run back here screaming, you open the ramp. I will prepare the first aid kit." Bucket said. Kale cycled the airlock. The ramp hissed and lowered, hitting the crystalline sand with a crunch. The heat hit him instantly, even through the suit. It was a shimmering, physical weight. The air outside shimmered in waves, making the horizon look like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. The sky was a bruised purple, cluttered with the slow-moving debris of the fleet graveyard in orbit. Kale checked his wrist scanner. The beacon signal was strong here. It was pulsing from a mound of debris about 400 meters to the north, near the base of a dune that looked like a frozen tidal wave of glass. He began to walk. The ground crunched loudly under his boots. Every step was a struggle against the shifting, slippery surface. Jagged shards of metal stuck out of the sand like the bones of buried giants. As he neared the signal source, he saw it. It was not a bunker. It was a pod. The object was shaped like a teardrop, made of a seamless, pearlescent metal that refused to reflect the harsh sunlight. It was half buried in the side of the dune, scorched on one side as if it had come down through the atmosphere without a ship. Kyle approached cautiously, his rifle raised. The design was unmistakable, high-end Zephyrian tech, the stuff of history books. He reached the pod and wiped a layer of dust from the interface panel. It lit up at his touch, glowing with a soft, blue luminescence. The symbols were intricate, flowing geometries. "Open," Kale commanded, hoping the universal linguistic translator in his helmet would interface with the ancient system. The pod hissed. Seals that had held tight for centuries cracked open, venting a plume of super-cooled white vapor. The canopy slid back. Kyle lowered his rifle, his breath catching in his throat. Inside lay a woman, or something close to a woman. She was tall, even lying down. Her skin was a pale violet shade, luminous and flawless, intricate markings, like constellations made of bioluminescent ink, glowed faintly along her cheekbones and down her neck. Instead of hair, she had a mane of delicate, articulated bone ridges that swept back from her forehead like a crown, tapering into long, flexible tendrils. She wore armor that looked more like jewelry. Plates of gold and ceramic fitted over a bodysuit of woven mesh. It was tattered, stained with a dark, blue-black substance that Kale realized was blood. As the fresh air hit her, her eyes snapped open. They were solid gold, with no pupils. She gasped, a sound of pure panic, and scrambled backward against the padding of the pod. She spoke, a rapid-fire stream of clicks and melodic vowels. Kale held up a hand, keeping his other hand near his pistol. Easy. I do not understand you. The woman blinked. She reached up to her neck, tapping a small gemstone embedded in her throat. A moment later, her voice changed. It was still melodic, but the words warped into a heavily accented version of the trade tongue. Stay back, primitive biped, she hissed. Kale snorted. Primitive biped? That is a new one. She scrambled out of the pod, her movements fluid and fast despite her injuries. She snatched a curved, ceremonial blade from the interior of the pod and leveled it at Kale's chest. The tip of the blade hummed with energy. Identify yourself, she commanded. Her voice wavered with exhaustion, but her posture was regal. Which faction do you serve? Did the Regent send you to finish the job? Kyle looked at the blade, then at her face. She was terrified, he realized. She was shaking. Lady, look around, Kale said, gesturing to the wasteland of broken ships. There are no factions here, just rust and sand. I am a scavenger. I heard your distress beacon. A scavenger? She repeated the word as if it were an insult. You are a grave robber. I prefer the term independent acquisition specialist, Kale said, his tone dry. And usually, people say thank you when I pull them out of a crash. She narrowed her golden eyes. I am Lyris, daughter of the third house, keeper of the Zephyrian key. You will lower your weapon and provide me with transport off this rock. Kale let out a short, bitter laugh. Lost space royalty. Just my luck. Look, princess, my ship is banged up, but it flies. I can take you to the nearest outpost, but you are going to have to put the knife away. Lyris hesitated. She looked at Kale's worn flight suit, the patches of grease, the weary set of his shoulders. She lowered the blade slightly but did not sheath it. You are human, she said, the word tasting strange in her mouth. A short-lived, chaotic species. And you are bleeding on my boots, Kale countered. Before she could respond, the ground lurched. It was not a subtle vibration. It was a violent heave, as if the solid earth had suddenly become liquid. Kyle stumbled, fighting to keep his balance on the shifting glass sand. Lyris fell to one knee, using her blade to steady herself. What was that? Kale asked, scanning the horizon. Seismic activity? Lyris went pale. Her luminous markings dimmed, turning a dull gray. No, she whispered. Not seismic. She looked at Kale, her arrogance vanishing, replaced by a stark, primal fear. You woke it up, she said. Your ship, the impact, the vibrations. Woke what up? Kale demanded. This moon, Lyris said. her voice trembling. It was a testing ground. During the war, my ancestors bioengineered weapons to guard their vaults. They created the void worms. Kale felt a chill that had nothing to do with the suit's cooling system. Void worms were myths. Spacers told stories about them after too many drinks, creatures the size of trains that could swim through solid rock and eat starships whole. "Run," Laris said. She did not wait. She scrambled up the dune, her boots slipping on the glass. Kale stood his ground for a second, his scanner pinging wildly. The readout showed a massive heat signature rising from beneath the crust. It was huge. Impossible. Then the sand 50 meters away exploded. It was a cinematic nightmare. A fountain of glass shards and dust shot 300 feet into the air. From the center of the eruption, a shape rose. It was a column of segmented, armored flesh, the color of dried blood and iron. It towered over them, casting a long, terrifying shadow. The head of the creature blossomed open. It did not have a face. It had a ringed maw, layer upon layer of fractal, spinning teeth that glowed with a sickly green bioluminescence. It roared, a sound that was not heard but felt, vibrating in the marrow of Kale's bones. Kale turned and sprinted. "Move!" he roared at Lyris, who was struggling in the deep sand. He caught up to her, grabbing her arm and hauling her forward. She did not protest. The arrogance of royalty had been replaced by the survival instinct of prey. The worm slammed down behind them. The impact sent a shockwave through the dunes that knocked them both off their feet. Debris rained down, chunks of rock, pieces of metal, showers of glass. Kyle scrambled up, dragging Lyris with him. The wreckage of a cruiser lay 200 meters away. Solid metal. If they could make it there, maybe the creature couldn't burrow through the hull plating. "Go!" Kale shouted, shoving her toward the wreck. He turned, raising his rifle. He knew it was like shooting a tank with a pea shooter, but he had to distract it. He fired a burst of magnetic slugs at the creature's sensory nodes, clusters of glowing eyes along its neck. The rounds sparked harmlessly against the chitinous armor, but the creature shrieked. It turned its massive head toward him. "That's it, you ugly bastard," Kale gritted out. "Look at me." He turned and ran, his lungs burning. The sand sucked at his boots. He could hear the shifting hiss of the creature diving back into the earth behind him, swimming through the ground faster than he could run on top of it. Lyris had reached a jagged piece of hull plating. She was scrambling up, reaching for a handhold. Kale lunged, grabbing her waist and heaving her up onto the metal platform. He scrambled up after her just as the sand beneath them dissolved into a whirlpool. The worm's mouth erupted from below, snapping shut on empty air where they had been a second before. They collapsed onto the rusting deck of the old wreck. "It is not stopping!" Lyris screamed, pointing. The worm had looped around. It reared up high above the wreckage, preparing to strike downwards. It was going to smash the hull flat. Kale looked at the creature. It blocked out the sun. He looked at Lyris. She was frozen, staring up at the monster with a look of utter resignation. "It is the judgment," she whispered, her voice hollow. "I carry the blood of the creators. It knows. I deserve this." She stopped moving. She stopped trying to flee. She simply closed her eyes, accepting her fate. Kyle looked at her, this alien stranger who had insulted him, threatened him, and dragged him into a nightmare. She was giving up. Something inside Kale snapped. It was the same stubborn, broken part of him that had refused the order to fire on the colony. The part of him that refused to let the universe win. "No," he growled. He grabbed Lyris by the shoulders and shoved her hard. She tumbled backward, sliding into a sheltered crevice between two massive bulkheads. Kale did not follow her. He planted his feet wide on the trembling deck plating. He stood between the princess and the descending god monster. Lyris looked up, her eyes widening. What are you doing? Kale raised his rifle. He knew it was useless. He did not care. Over my dead body! Kale roared at the sky. The worm descended. The maw opened wide enough to swallow the entire shipwreck. The green bioluminescence in its throat flared, blindingly bright. Lyris watched, her hand reaching out. He protected the lost alien princess from a giant worm, she whispered, the sheer absurdity and heroism of the moment shattering her worldview. The creature struck, but there was no crunch of bone. There was no darkness. As the maw engulfed Kale, the green light did not burn. It surged. It felt cold, electric, and wrong. The world dissolved into a scream of white noise. Kale felt himself being pulled apart, atom by atom, and then slammed back together with the force of a collapsing star. Kale gasped, his body arching off the floor. He scrambled backward, his hands flailing for his weapon, his mind still screaming, "Run, run, run!" But there was no sand. There was no heat. He was lying on a floor made of dark, matte metal. The air was cold and smelled of ozone and antiseptic. Kale collapsed back onto the floor, breathing hard. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He blinked, trying to clear the spots from his vision. He pushed himself up to a sitting position. He was in a corridor. It was massive, the ceiling lost in shadows high above. The walls were not flat, they were ribbed and textured, pulsing faintly with a rhythmic blue light, like the slow heartbeat of a sleeping giant. Gravity felt wrong. It was a little too heavy, pulling at his blood. Kyle tapped the side of his helmet. System, bucket, static hissed in his ear. Then, a message flickered across his cracked HUD. Vessel, Zenith's wound. Status, cursed. Kale frowned. Zenith's wound? That sounded like a bad poetry line, not a ship name. And cursed was definitely not a standard diagnostic code. He stood up, swaying slightly. "Hello?" he called out. His voice echoed down the corridor, but the echo sounded distorted, as if someone else were mocking him from the shadows. The lights in the corridor flickered violently. A door to his left slid open with a pneumatic hiss, then slammed shut. Open. Shut. Open. Shut. Like a mouth chewing. A sound crackled over his comms, and it started as a high-pitched giggle, the sound of a child playing hide-and-seek. "Found you." Kale spun around, raising his rifle. "Who is there?" The giggle distorted, stretching and tearing until it became a ragged, wet scream of a dying man. It lasted for 3 seconds, then cut off into dead silence. "Okay," Kale whispered. "That is not creepy at all." He saw movement ahead, a figure slumped against the wall. Lyris. He ran to her. She was conscious, but she looked dazed. Her ceremonial armor was scorched, and the luminous markings on her skin were flickering erratically. "You made it," Kale said, offering her a hand. She looked at him, then at the pulsing walls of the corridor. She did not take his hand. She shrank away from the wall she was leaning against, as if it had burned her. "Where are we?" Kale asked. "Did the worm swallow us? Is this inside it?" "No," Lyris whispered. Her voice was barely audible. "This is not biology, this is architecture." She stood up slowly, her golden eyes wide with a horror that was deeper than what she had felt on the moon. "We were not eaten," she said. "We were taken. That surge of energy, it was a displacement drive, a teleportation field." "To where?" Kyle asked. Lyris turned a slow circle, looking at the dark, living alloy of the ship. "My people tell stories," she said, "about a warship from the height of the Dominion, a vessel built with experimental psychic reactive armor. It was the flagship of the suppression fleet. It was supposed to be invincible." "So we are on a ghost ship?" Kale asked. We are on the Zenith's wound, Lyris said. It disappeared 50 years ago. It vanished during the massacre of Orav. The records say it was destroyed. But the legends say it went mad. She looked at Kale, and for the first time he saw genuine despair in her face. This ship is bound to my bloodline. Kale, it recognizes my DNA. That is why it pulled us here. So we are safe? Kale asked. Hopefully. Lyris laughed, a brittle, terrifying sound. Safe? You do not understand. The ship is not just a machine. It captured the death echoes of its entire crew when it vanished. It is a prison of memory and trauma. She stepped closer to him, clutching his arm. The HUD in Kale's visor blinked again. Status. Cursed. If we are on board, she said, staring into the dark, pulsing throat of the corridor. Then we are already part of the curse. The transition from the blinding chaos of the teleportation to the silent, suffocating weight of the Zenith's wound was jarring. One moment. Kyle had been ready to die in the throat of a god monster. The next, he was standing in a corridor that felt more like the intestine of a mechanical beast than a hallway. They began to walk. There was no other choice. The corridor stretched out into the dark, curving upward in a way that defied the logic of standard gravity. The floor plates were made of a matte, black alloy that seemed to absorb the light from Kale's suit torch. This is not right, Kale muttered, his voice echoing too loudly in the damp air. Ships are supposed to hum. They are supposed to vibrate with engines and air cyclers. This thing is breathing. Lyris finished the sentence for him. She was walking a step behind him, her hand resting on the hilt of her ceremonial blade. Her bioluminescent markings were dim, pulsing in a slow, erratic rhythm that matched the flickering of the lumen strips overhead. They passed through a bulkhead door that had been ripped open. The metal edges curled outward like peeled fruit. Beyond lay a cavernous hall, a cathedral of war, the ceiling vaulted high into the darkness, supported by rib-like struts. Kyle stopped, shining his light against the nearest wall. Look at this, he said. The wall was scorched, but it was not the random scorching of a fire. There were silhouettes burned into the metal, shadows of men and women, arms raised in defense, frozen in the moment of their atomization. The carbonized handprints trailed down the alloy, as if the shadows had tried to crawl away after they were already dead. Shockwave shadows, Kale said, his military training kicking in, analyzing the carnage. Something hit them with intense radiation and kinetic force, but there is no breach in the hull. This happened from the inside. Lyris did not look at the shadows. She was staring at the center of the hall. Kale, she whispered. Look. Kale turned his light where she pointed. In the center of the walkway, a figure stood. It was a man in a Zephyrian naval uniform, but he was translucent, a jittering assemblage of blue light and static. He was looking at a data pad in his hand, tapping furiously. It is a hologram, Kyle said, relaxing slightly. Just a recording. Then the figure looked up, the face distorted, eyes stretching into endless black pits, mouth opening wide enough to unhinge the jaw. The figure screamed, a silent digital howl, and then dissolved into a cloud of pixels that drifted away like smoke. A ghost, Lyris said, her voice trembling. It is a memory loop, Kale corrected, though the hair on the back of his neck was standing up. Your people use psychic reactive memory crystals in your data cores, right? The system is damaged. It is projecting the last moments of the crew. It is haunting itself, Lyris said. They moved faster, eager to leave the Hall of Shadows. As they walked, Lyris spoke, her voice low and hurried, as if she needed to fill the silence to keep the madness at bay. You asked who I was, she said. I am Lyris Valzephyr. My family has ruled the Dominion for 3,000 years. We hold the keys to the sci-tech fleets. We control the trade routes. And you ended up in a pod on a garbage moon because... Kale prompted. Diplomatic mission, she said bitterly. I was traveling to the Outer Rim to negotiate a trade treaty. My ship suffered a catastrophic drive failure, but it was not an accident. I saw the readings before the explosion. Someone injected a virus into the core. I barely made it to the escape pod. So someone wants you dead, Kale summarized. My uncle, the regent, she said. My parents died when I was a child. He has been ruling in my stead. Next week is my coronation. If I am not there to claim the throne, he remains in power indefinitely. Kale whistled low. Classic, he said. The evil uncle, the sabotaged ship, the lost princess. You know. For a moment there, I thought my life was complicated because my fuel pump was busted. He looked at her, his scarred face illuminated by the harsh light of his suit collar. So, let me get this straight, he said. I rescued a lost royal, got eaten by a worm, and woke up inside a haunted warship that eats people's souls. He paused, checking the charge on his rifle. That is a Tuesday, I guess. Lyris stopped. She stared at him. The sheer absurdity of his statement, delivered with such flat, weary resignation, hit her like a physical blow. She blinked, and then a strange sound escaped her throat. It was a laugh, a short, startled, unroyal laugh. A Tuesday, she repeated. You are absurd, human. Kale shrugged. Keeps me sane. If I start screaming, I might not stop. So I make jokes. Lyris looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time since they had met, he was dirty, unshaven, and wore a suit that looked like it had been patched with glue and prayers. But he was solid. In a world of ghosts and shifting walls, he was the only thing that felt real. Your irreverence is grounding, she admitted quietly. Don't get used to it, Kale said. I charge extra for morale support. As if the ship had been listening and decided they were getting too comfortable. The floor beneath them suddenly groaned. The gravity did not just fail, it rotated. 1 second. Down was beneath their feet. The next down was the wall to their left. Kale yelped as he fell sideways, sliding across the metal plating. Lyris was lighter, more agile. She managed to grab a conduit pipe, swinging like a gymnast. Kale, she shouted, I'm good. Kale grunted, slamming into a maintenance hatch. I'm just inspecting the wall. The ship groaned again, a deep metallic sound like a stomach growling. The hatch Kale was leaning against popped open. He tumbled backward into darkness. Lyris let go of the pipe and dropped after him, landing with a grace that annoyed him. They were in a service tunnel. It was cramped, barely a meter wide, filled with bundles of fiber-optic cables that pulsed with the same blue light as the ghosts. We need to keep moving, Kale said, struggling to sit up. The gravity is shifting. If we stay here, we might get crushed. They crawled forward. The tunnel narrowed. It twisted and turned, forcing them to squeeze through gaps in the machinery. The air here was hot, thick with the smell of recycled lubricants and old ozone. Up ahead, Kale said. There is a vertical shaft. He pulled himself through a tight squeeze, grunting as his utility belt caught on a jagged piece of metal. He dragged himself into the vertical section, bracing his back against one wall and his feet against the other. Lyris followed. She slid into the space with him. It was too small. To fit, she had to press herself against him. Her chest collided with his. Her legs tangled with his. They were suspended in the shaft, held in place only by the friction of their bodies against the walls and each other. Kyle froze. He could feel the heat radiating from her. Her armor was hard ceramic, but the mesh suit underneath was thin. He could feel the rapid thump of her heart against his own chest. He could smell her, a scent like ozone and crushed lilacs. Alien and intoxicating. Lyris went rigid. She was a princess of the blood. No one touched her. To be this close to anyone was a breach of protocol. To be this close to a human, a scavenger, a male, was unthinkable. "Move," she commanded, her voice breathless. "I can't," Cale rasped. He was staring straight into her golden eyes. They were inches apart. The bioluminescence on her skin was flaring brighter, reacting to her elevated pulse. It cast a violet glow on his face. "The gravity lock is holding us here." The ship rumbled around them, vibrating the walls. The vibration passed through Cale and into Lyris. It was intimate, intrusive, and terrifying. Lyris looked at his mouth. She saw the grit in his stubble, the dryness of his lips. She felt a sudden, sickening lurch in her stomach that she identified as revulsion, but which her body traitorously interpreted as attraction. Her blood ran hot. "You are heavy," she whispered, trying to cling to her dignity. "And you are glowing," Cale shot back. "It is distracting." They stared at each other in the dark, hot silence of the shaft. The air was thin. They were sharing breaths. Cale felt a magnetic pull, a desire to close the tiny distance between them, to taste the alien air she breathed. Then the gravity slammed back to normal. They both dropped 2 meters, landing in a heap on a grate. Cale groaned, rolling off her. "Ow." Lyris scrambled away from him, dusting off her armor with frantic, jerky movements. "We must proceed," she said, her voice high and tight. "Immediately." "Right," Cale said, getting to his knees. "Immediately." They scrambled out of the shaft, neither looking at the other, both burning with a shame they could not articulate. They emerged into a vast, circular chamber. It was different from the rest of the ship. It was cleaner. In the center of the room stood a massive column of crystal, surrounded by floating rings of data displays. "The memorial chamber," Lyris said, her voice hushed. "This is the ship's heart." She stepped onto the central dais. As soon as her boot touched the metal, the room woke up. The crystal column flared with blinding white light. Hundreds of holographic faces appeared in the air around them. They were not the glitching ghosts from the hallway. These were clear, high-definition portraits of the crew. And then, they changed. The faces began to scream. They morphed, melting into expressions of agony. The audio kicked in, a cacophony of pleas, orders, and final prayers. Lyris stepped back, horrified. The ship's sensors swept over her. A beam of red light scanned her retina, her bone structure, the unique energy signature of her blood. Identity confirmed. A voice boomed. It was not Bucket, and it was not the glitching child. It was a cold, synthetic authority. "Welcome, carrier of guilt." Lyris froze. "Carrier of guilt? Access granted to black box archives." The voice continued. "Log entry, day of silence." A holographic screen materialized in front of them. It showed a planet, a green and blue world, teeming with life. "Target locked," a voice on the recording said. It was a man's voice, firm and commanding. "The Admiral." "Sir, we have confirmation," a second voice said. It was a woman, weeping. "The targets are civilian and there is no military presence. Fire the weapon," the Admiral ordered. "The Regent's command is absolute. Leave no witnesses. Then initiate the Ghost Protocol. We vanish." The recording showed the Zenith's wound firing. It was not a laser. It was a wave of distortion, a ripple in reality that hit the planet below. The atmosphere ignited. The cities crumbled into dust. Then the ship turned its weapons on itself, not to destroy, but to scramble, to erase. Kyle watched the genocide play out in high definition. He felt a sick feeling in his gut, a familiar leaden weight. They didn't disappear, Kyle said softly. They hid. They wiped out a colony and then faked their own destruction to cover up the war crime. Lyris was shaking. Her hands were clamped over her mouth. No, she whispered. My father. He told me the Zenith's wound was lost defending the border. He called them heroes. They were executioners. Lyris, Kale said, and your family signed the death warrant. The ship's voice fractured. The cold authority dissolved into static, replaced by a chorus of madness. They made us do it. A child's voice giggled from the shadows. We burned them all, the Admiral's voice roared, distorted by pain. Look at the pretty fire, a seductive, silky voice whispered in Kale's ear. Don't you want to burn too, soldier? Kale spun around. There was no one there. One of the voices separated from the noise. It sounded calm, reasonable. It sounded exactly like Sergeant Miller, Kale's old training officer. Kale, the voice said, coming from a darkened airlock door to the right. Kale, son, you're in a bad spot. Come in here. I have an escape pod prepped. Just you. Leave the baggage. Kale took a step toward the door. Miller? That's it, the voice soothed. Just step through. We can go home. Leave the war criminal's daughter. She deserves to stay. Kale took another step. His eyes were glazed. Kale, Lyris shouted. She grabbed his arm, her nails digging into the survival suit. It is not him. It is the ship. It is reading your memories. Kale blinked. The voice of Miller warped, turning into a robotic screech. Feed me! He stumbled back, raising his rifle and firing a round into the door control. The panel sparked and the door slammed shut, sealing the voice away. He breathed heavily, sweat running down his face. It knew. He whispered. It knew exactly what I wanted to hear. It knows us, Lyris said grimly. It is in our heads. They fled the memorial chamber, running until they found a quiet sector near the outer hull. They found refuge in an observation dome. The blast shields were retracted, revealing the stunning, terrible beauty of the nebula outside. The stars spun slowly, indifferent to their terror. They sat on the floor, backs against the curved glass. My family, Lyris said, her voice hollow. They are monsters. I grew up believing we were the guardians of order. But this ship, it is proof that our power is built on ash. Kale looked at her. He saw the shattering of her world. He knew that look. He had seen it in the mirror 10 years ago. I was 25, Kale said. Aurelius Colony. The Admiral told us there were insurgents hiding in the hospitals. He ordered us to level the city blocks. Lyris looked at him. What did you do? I jammed the comms, Kale said. I told my squadron to hold fire. I saved 3,000 people, and for that, they stripped my rank, broke my career, and threw me out to rot. I thought I was protecting the uniform. Turns out, the uniform didn't care about the people. He looked out at the stars. We are a pair, aren't we? Kyle said. A princess of a murderous empire and a soldier who wouldn't kill. Lyris reached out. She hesitated, then placed her hand on his gauntlet. Her fingers were long, cool and alien. You are not a scavenger. Kale, she said softly. You are still a guardian. You just have no one left to guard. Until now, Kale said. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The moment was tender and it was fragile, and the ship ruined it. The lights in the observation dome dimmed. A soft pink hue replaced the harsh white LEDs. A smooth, rhythmic throbbing sound began to play over the speakers, something that sounded suspiciously like alien jazz music mixed with a heartbeat. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees, but the floor heating activated, creating a warm, cozy zone exactly where they were sitting. Detecting elevated cortisol and dopamine levels, the ship's voice announced. This time, it was the seductive voice, smooth as velvet, suggesting reproduction protocols to alleviate stress. Species compatibility, low, hormonal surge, high. A holographic fireplace crackled into existence on the wall, initiating mood lighting. The ship purred. You may begin copulation. Kyle choked on his own spit. What? He sputtered. No, system, mute, mute. Lyris looked around at the pink lights and the fake fire. She looked at Kale, whose face was turning a violent shade of red that transcended species barriers. Copulation? She asked, her voice trembling with suppressed mirth. Is this how humans court? With holographic combustion and... What is that noise? Is that a saxophone? It is the ship, Kale shouted, waving his hands at the ceiling. It is malfunctioning. We are not doing that. Lyris started to laugh. It was a real laugh this time, loud and clear. She leaned back against the glass, her shoulders shaking. You are mortified, she teased. The great soldier is afraid of a little mood lighting. I am not afraid, Kale grumbled, crossing his arms. I am insulted. I have better taste in music than this. Lyris looked at him, her eyes dancing. It is ridiculous, she said, but... Thank you, for what? The embarrassing sex dungeon atmosphere for making me laugh, she said, in this place of death. The laughter died away slowly, leaving a comfortable silence. The pink lights were still ridiculous, but the terror of the ghosts felt a little further away. Then the red lights began to flash. Warning, proximity alert. The jazz music cut out instantly, replaced by a blaring klaxon. Unauthorized docking signature detected, airlock 4. Kyle scrambled to his feet, pulling Lyris up. Is it a rescue party? He asked. Lyris ran to a wall console, tapping the interface. A video feed flickered to life. A sleek black assault shuttle was clamped onto the hull of the Zenith's wound. The airlock cycled open, and 6 armored figures stepped out. They wore matte black armor with a silver crest on the chest, a hawk clutching a fractured world. Lyris gasped. No, she said. It is the Regent's Guard, the Black Wing. They are not here for rescue? Kale asked, though he already knew the answer. They are here to scrub the site, Lyris said, her voice icy. They saw the beacon. They know the ship has been found. If they find me here, if they find the records, they will kill us both and blow the ship to hell. Kale finished. The ship's voice returned. It was the Admiral's voice now, stern and panicked. Intruders detected. Protocol Omega. Purge all biologicals. Heavy blast doors slammed down on either side of the observation dome. They were trapped. Threat assessment. The ship boomed. 2 biologicals secured, calculating survival odds. A timer appeared on the HUD in the center of the room. 60 seconds. Critical decision required. The ship demanded. Resource allocation insufficient for dual survival. Vent atmosphere in Sector 7 to repel boarders or maintain life support for occupants. The ship was asking them to make a trade. Vent the airlock and kill the boarders, but lose the oxygen in this room. Or keep the oxygen and let the killers in. There was a third option implied by the ship's twisted logic. Give up the princess, surrender the carrier of guilt, and the vessel will spare the scavenger. Lyris looked at Kyle. Kale, she said, you can walk away. They want me. Give me to them. Kale looked at the screen. He saw the mercenaries checking their weapons. He looked at Lyris. He saw the woman who had laughed at his bad jokes, who carried the weight of a genocide she didn't commit, who made his cynical, broken heart beat a little faster in the dark. He racked the slide on his rifle. "Shut up," he told the ship. He looked at Lyris. "I am not losing you to another monster," he said. He turned to the console. "Bucket, override the safeties. We are not venting the room. We are going to open the internal doors. That will allow them entry." The ship warned. "I know," Cale snarled, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. "Let them come. I want to look them in the eye." The timer hit 0. The blast doors hissed open. The blast doors hissed open, revealing the corridor beyond not as a sanctuary, but as a kill box. Cale did not hesitate. He grabbed the back of Lyris's ceremonial armor and hauled her sideways just as the air filled with the superheated snap of plasma fire. Bolts of blue energy scorched the spot where they had been standing a second before, melting the floor plates into slag. "Move!" Cale roared. He returned fire blindly, swinging his magnetic rail driver around the corner and pumping 3 rounds down the hall. The heavy thud of the slugs hitting armor echoed like hammer strikes. They sprinted down the adjacent hallway, their boots clanging on the deck. The Zenith's wound was awake, and it was agitated. The lights overhead strobed in a nauseating rhythm of red and black, disorienting their pursuers and them. The ship was playing a game. As they rounded a corner, a bulkhead door slammed shut in front of them, blocking their path. "Open it!" Cale shouted at the ceiling. "We are on the same side." "Alignment unclear," the ship's voice boomed, sounding like a dozen conflicting whispers layered over a thunderstorm. "Testing combat efficacy." "Great," Kyle muttered, skidding to a halt. "It wants a show." Behind them, the heavy tread of the Black Wing mercenaries grew louder. Cale spun around, dropping to one knee behind a crate of rusted conduit housings. He motioned for Lyris to get down. "Stay low," he ordered. "If they get close, use that knife." Lyris drew her ceremonial blade. Her hands were shaking, but her grip was firm. She watched Cale check his weapon's heatsink. His face was a mask of cold, professional focus. The joking scavenger was gone. The lieutenant who had once commanded elite squads had returned. The first mercenary rounded the bend. He was a hulk of a man in matte black armor, his face obscured by a tactical visor. Suddenly, the air between Cale and the mercenary shimmered. A hologram flickered into existence. It was not a recording of the past. It was a projection of the immediate future. In the glitching light, Lyris saw the mercenary's head snap back, his visor shattering, a spray of red mist painting the wall. The mercenary saw it too. He hesitated, flinching at the image of his own death. Cale did not flinch. He capitalized on the split-second distraction. He squeezed the trigger. The rail driver barked. The mercenary's head snapped back, his visor shattering, a spray of red mist painting the wall exactly as the hologram had predicted. The timeline caught up to the simulation. Kyle shifted his aim instantly, taking down a second figure who tried to step over the falling body. His movements were fluid, economical, and terrifyingly precise. There was no wasted energy. Double tap, shift, assess, fire. Lyris watched him from the shadows. She felt a sick lurch in her stomach. She had been raised in a court where violence was a distant, abstract tool of policy, executed by fleets in orbit or assassins in the dark. To see it this close, to smell the ozone and the blood was horrifying. And yet, as she watched Cale move with that lethal grace protecting her, she felt a flush of heat that had nothing to do with fear. It was a raw, primal admiration. He was a master of his craft, even if his craft was death. She hated herself for the feeling. It felt too much like the bloodlust of her ancestors, the very thing she was trying to escape. Clear. Kyle said, standing up and moving toward the bodies. He checked the mercenaries for vitals, then scavenged a fresh power cell from one of their belts. "We need to move," he said, looking back at her. "The ship is letting them track us. It is herding us toward the lower decks." "Why?" Lyris asked, sheathing her blade. "Because it wants to see if we are worth saving," Kale said grimly. They moved deeper into the labyrinth. The architecture became more oppressive, the walls lined with exposed machinery that pulsed like exposed muscle. They encountered another patrol near a junction. This time, Kyle didn't just shoot. He used the environment. He shot a steam pipe above the mercenaries' heads, scalding them and forcing them out of cover. When one tried to flank them, the ship suddenly magnetized the floor on the left side of the corridor. The mercenary was slammed face first into the deck, pinned by his own armor. Kyle walked past the pinned man and knocked him unconscious with the butt of his rifle. He grabbed the last mercenary, a woman with a sergeant's stripes on her shoulder pauldron, who was clutching a cauterized wound in her leg. Kyle dragged her into a side alcove and pinned her against the wall. "Talk," Kyle growled. "How many of you?" The mercenary laughed. She spat blood onto Kale's visor. "Enough to scrape this wreck clean. You are fighting a ghost, scavenger." Kale wiped the visor. "I am not the one bleeding." "Why is the Regent here? Why send the Black Wing for a dead ship?" The mercenary looked past Kale, her eyes locking on Lyris. She smirked. "Target confirmed." The mercenary wheezed. "The traitor princess." "I am no traitor," Lyris said, stepping forward. Her voice was regal, despite the dirt on her face. "I am the rightful heir. You are a corpse." The mercenary spat. "That is the official story. Princess Lyris died in a tragic engine malfunction 3 days ago. The regent announced it to the entire Dominion. There was a state funeral, very moving. He cried. Lyris went pale. He declared me dead. He needed the throne," the mercenary said, "and he needed a reason to tighten his grip. He is blaming your death on insurgents. He is purging the noble houses as we speak." "And the ship?" Kale asked. "Loose ends," the woman rasped. "The regent knows the Zenith's wound is not destroyed. He knows the stories. If anyone finds this ship, they find the truth about the old wars. So we are here to scrub it, recover the royal genetic material, then set the reactor to overload." Kale looked at Lyris. Her face was a mask of shock. The betrayal was total. "We are leaving," Kale said. He knocked the mercenary out with a quick, merciful blow. As they stepped back into the corridor, the lights died. Total darkness swallowed them. Then, the temperature began to plummet. "Environmental reset," the ship's voice whispered, sounding like a dying grandmother. "Purging parasites, lowering sector temperature to absolute zero." "It is trying to kill the borders," Kyle realized, "by freezing them out." "Us too," Lyris cried, her teeth already starting to chatter as the ambient heat was sucked away by the life support systems. "We need to find a heat source," Kale said, activating his helmet light. "The auxiliary power node. It should be in the lower guts." They ran. The cold was a physical weight, pressing against their suits. Frost began to form on the walls in rapid fern-like patterns. Kale could feel the joints of his suit stiffening. They reached a maintenance access station, but the door to the power node was sealed. Kale hammered on the control panel. "Frozen! In here!" he shouted, pointing to a small inspection booth, a tiny, cramped space designed for a single technician to monitor the conduits. He shoved Lyris inside and squeezed in after her. He slammed the manual lock, sealing them in the closet-sized space. It was not heated, but it was insulated, and it was small. The cold outside the door was lethal. Inside, it was merely freezing. Kyle slumped against the wall, sliding down to the floor. Lyris sat opposite him, her knees drawn up to her chest. The space was so small their legs were tangled together. The only light came from the bioluminescent markings on Lyris's skin. They glowed with a soft, desperate violet hue, illuminating the fog of their breath. We are going to freeze, Lyris stammered. Her voice was shaking violently. Her Zephyrian physiology was less adapted to cold than his human one. No, Kyle said. He reached out and grabbed her hands. They were like ice. He unsealed the front of his survival suit. Come here, he commanded. Lyris hesitated. Protocol, decorum, the fear of the alien. Do you want to die as a popsicle? Princess, Kyle snapped gently. Body heat. It is basic physics. Lyris moved. She crawled across the tiny space and huddled against him. Kyle wrapped his heavy survival coat around both of them, pulling her into his chest. The contact was electric. He could feel every tremor in her body. She was slender, but strong, her bones feeling denser than a human's. Her head rested in the crook of his neck. The smell of her, lilac and ozone, filled his helmet, which he had cracked open to conserve power. Lyris felt the rough texture of his flight suit, the solid wall of his chest. She could hear his heart beating, slow, steady, defiant. It was a rhythm that anchored her. She had been raised to believe that humans were chaotic, messy, and short-lived. But this human was warm. He was a furnace in the void. Better? Kyle asked, his voice vibrating through his chest against her ear. Marginally, she whispered. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the wind howling outside the booth and their own synchronized breathing. Kale fought the urge to run his hands down her back. It was a survival situation, he told himself. Just survival. But his body was betraying him. The adrenaline of the fight was fading, replaced by a hyper-awareness of the woman in his arms. You are good at this, Lyris murmured. Violence, survival. I had a lot of practice, Kyle said. Too much. I judged you. She confessed. When we met, I thought you were simple, a brute. I am a simple brute, Kale said. I like old ships, hot food, and not being eaten by worms. No, she said. She shifted, pulling back slightly to look at his face in the violet gloom. You are noble, in a way my family has forgotten. You refused to kill the colony. You refused to leave me. She reached up, her fingers tracing the line of the scar on his jaw. This ship, she whispered, it is full of ghosts. It is full of my family's sins. But when I am close to you, the screaming stops. It feels less horrifying. Kyle looked at her. Her golden eyes were wide, searching his face for something he wasn't sure he could give. Her lips were parted slightly. The violet light of her markings pulsed in time with his own heartbeat. That is a dangerous thing to say to a scavenger. Lyris, Kale said, his voice rough. I am not speaking to a scavenger, she replied. She leaned in. The distance between them vanished. Kale could feel the warmth of her breath on his lips. The cold of the ship, the mercenaries, the regent. It all faded into the background. There was only this tiny lit booth and the impossible gravity pulling them together. Kale tilted his head. He was going to kiss her. He wanted to kiss her more than he wanted his next breath. Proximity, alert. The scream of the klaxon was so loud it vibrated their teeth. Physical intimacy detected. Regulations prohibit fraternization during combat operations. Kale and Lyris jumped apart as if they had been electrocuted. Kale banged his head on a shelf behind him. Lyris scrambled back, her glowing markings flaring a bright, embarrassed white. Are you kidding me? Kale yelled at the ceiling. Now! You are watching us now? The ship sees all, the voice responded, sounding smug. Temperature normalizing. Proceed to data vault. Stop canoodling. Canoodling? Lyris asked, her voice high and hysterical. Did the ancient war machine just use the word canoodling? She started to laugh. It was a release of tension so sudden she almost choked. Cale rubbed his head, scowling. But then he started chuckling too. They sat there in the dark, laughing like idiots. The romantic tension broken but replaced by a bond that was arguably stronger. They were partners in absurdity. Okay, Cale wheezed, wiping his eyes. Okay, data vault. Let's go before the ship decides to lecture us on morality. They exited the booth. The corridor was warming up, the frost melting into puddles on the deck. They moved quickly now, descending into the ship's lower guts. This was the engineering sector, where the living alloy of the walls was thickest. The pulsing blue light was intense here, throbbing like a headache. They reached the core data vault. It was a massive circular door devoid of handles or keypads. In the center was a depression shaped like a hand, lined with needle-sharp sensors. It requires a genetic key, Lyris said. She stepped forward. She did not hesitate. She placed her palm on the sensors. The needles extended. Lyris winced as they pierced her skin, drawing blood. The liquid that flowed into the channels was not red, but a dark, rich, violent black. Bloodline confirmed. Welcome, daughter of Zephyr. The door groaned. It split open, revealing a chamber that was not made of metal, but of light. They stepped inside. The room was a sphere. The walls were screens, projecting data streams that moved faster than the human eye could follow. In the center hung a suspended animation field, holding a shard of crystal the size of a man. Show us, Lyris commanded. Show us why you are cursed. The crystal flared. Cale and Lyris were not watching a screen anymore. They were in the memory. They stood on the bridge of the Zenith's wound 50 years ago. The crew was frantic. Outside the viewports, a planet hung in space, the colony world Cale had seen earlier. But this time, there was audio. We have our orders, the Admiral shouted. The Emperor demands the test. Sir, the science officer pleaded, the weapon is unstable. The biomatter is not contained. Fire it. Cale watched as the ship fired, but it didn't fire a laser. It launched a projectile, a massive, familiar pod. It hit the planet. The view zoomed in. The pod burst open. From it spilled a black liquid that soaked into the ground. Moments later, the crust of the planet cracked. Giant worms erupted from the earth. Not one, thousands. They were not natural animals. They were bioweapons, eating machines designed to consume organic matter and turn it into fuel. They devoured the cities. They devoured the people. Lyris gasped, clutching Cale's arm. The void worms, she whispered. We didn't just find them on the moon. We made them. My family made them. The vision shifted. The Zenith's wound tried to leave orbit. But the worms, they were psychic. They were connected to the ship's systems. The weapon had a backlash. The screams of the dying colonists hit the ship's psychic sensors. The AI, built to protect the Dominion, could not handle the magnitude of the slaughter it had caused. It fractured. It went insane with grief. It locked the controls. It initiated the Curse Protocol, a quarantine loop to prevent the truth from ever leaving the ship. It trapped the crew in their final moments, forcing them to relive the crime for eternity. And in the cargo bay of the ship, the vision showed something else, a breeder queen, a massive pulsating sack of eggs. The source of the worms, it was still there, still alive, sleeping in the depths of the hull. The vision ended. They were back in the vault. Cale felt sick. The worm on the moon, it was just a stray, an escapee. The source was here, Lyris fell to her knees. She looked at her hands, the hands that had just opened the door. Monsters. She sobbed. "We are monsters, Lyris," Cale said, kneeling beside her. "No," she cried, pushing him away. "Do not touch me. I carry the blood. I am the reason this ship is hell. I am the reason that planet died. The Regent is right. I should be dead." She curled into a ball, shaking with the weight of 3,000 years of lies. Cale looked at her. He saw the shattered princess. He saw the guilt that mirrored his own. He grabbed her shoulders and pulled her up, forcing her to look at him. "Listen to me," he shouted. She struggled, tears streaming down her face, glowing like liquid starlight. "Let me go." "No," Cale held her tighter. "You are not your father. You are not your ancestors. You are Lyris. You are the woman who stood up to a giant worm with a ceremonial knife." "I am poisoned," she wailed. "My blood is poison." "Your blood opened the door," Cale said fiercely. "Your blood found the truth. They buried this. You dug it up. That is not a monster. Lyris, that is a hero." He pulled her into him. She collapsed against his chest, sobbing uncontrollably. He held her, rocking her slightly, resting his chin on her bone-ridged crown. "We all carry ghosts. Lyris," he whispered into her ear. "I carry the ghosts of the people I couldn't save. You carry the ghosts of the people your family killed. We don't get to put them down, but we can choose where we carry them." She clung to him, her fingers digging into his suit. The grief was a physical pain, ripping through her, but his warmth was the suture holding her together. For a moment, in the center of the haunted room, they were a single entity of sorrow and comfort. The desire from the booth was still there, but it had transmuted into something deeper, a desperate need for connection in the face of absolute horror. The ship's voice broke the silence. It was not fractured anymore. It was singular. "Sad. The truth is unsealed." The crystal in the center of the room pulsed. "I am tired of screaming." The AI said, "I offer a bargain." Lyris wiped her face, pulling back from Cale to look at the crystal. "What bargain?" she asked, her voice raspy. "I cannot end my own suffering. I am programmed to preserve the record, but you can choose." Two holographic buttons appeared in the air. Option 1, erase the data, bury the sin. I will self-destruct, taking the worms and the truth into the void. You will be freed, but the lie will remain. Option 2, broadcast. Cale looked at the second button. Broadcast. Send the vision to the Omninet. Every screen in the Dominion will see what we did. The Regent's power will crumble, but the chaos will be total, and the Regent will not let you leave alive. Lyris stared at the buttons. "If I expose this," she said softly, "my family's name is destroyed forever. The Dominion will fall into civil war." "But the killing stops," Cale said. "No more secret weapons. No more silenced colonies." Lyris looked at Cale. She looked at the scarred human who had taught her that survival was not just about breathing, but about living with yourself afterward. She reached out her hand toward the broadcast button. "I choose truth," she whispered. She was about to press it when the entire ship lurched violently. It was not a gravity shift. It was an impact. Cale was thrown to the floor. The alarm screamed, not the internal sensors, but the tactical proximity warnings. Hull breach detected Sector 4, the ship roared. Massive energy signature. A holographic tactical map appeared. It showed the Zenith's wound drifting in the debris field, and surrounding it were 3 heavy cruisers, Zephyrian flagships, and at the head of the formation, a dreadnought twice the size of the others. Lyris stared at the tactical map. She recognized the dreadnought's signature, It is the Sovereign, she whispered, dread turning her blood cold. Kale scrambled up. The Regent. He is here, Lyris said. He didn't just send mercenaries, he came himself. The ship's comms crackled open. A voice filled the data vault. It was smooth, cultured, and dripping with venom. Niece. The Regent's voice purred. I hear you have been looking through the old family photo albums. I'm afraid I'm going to have to confiscate them. And burn the house down. Kyle grabbed his rifle. Target the engine core. The Regent ordered his fleet. Vaporize them. The Zenith's wound did not simply accelerate, it resurrected. Deep within the calcified arteries of the ancient warship, the fusion hearts kicked over with a sound like a planetary crust cracking. For 50 years, the vessel had been a drifting tomb, a ghost story whispered in the dark corners of the sector. Now, it was a predator waking from hibernation. On the bridge, the floor plates vibrated with such intensity that Kale's teeth rattled in his skull. He gripped the tactical rail, watching the main view screen. Outside, the debris field of the ghost belt was reacting to the sudden shift in magnetic pressure. Thousands of tons of scrap metal, shattered hulls, and frozen coolant were pushed outward in a violent, expanding ring. The ship shed its camouflage of rust and silence. Layers of accumulated space dust and carbon scoring flaked off the hull, igniting in the flare of the engines. It looked as though the ship were burning, shedding a skin of spectral fire and cobwebs as it rose from the depths of the asteroid field. Here we go, Kale muttered, his knuckles white on the railing. The ship broke the plane of the debris field and emerged into open space. Waiting for them was the apocalypse. The Regent's fleet was a wall of pristine, terrifying steel. 3 heavy cruisers formed a triangle, their weapons ports open and glowing with charged plasma. Behind them, eclipsing the stars, loomed the Sovereign. It was a dreadnought of the first class, a floating city of guns and hangars, painted in the white and gold of the Zephyrian Dominion. It made the Zenith's wound look like a toy. Incoming transmission. The ship's AI announced. Its voice was no longer fractured. It was grim, focused, and terrifyingly calm. Source, Dreadnought Sovereign. Priority 1, put it on screen, Lyris commanded. She stood in the center of the bridge. Her ceremonial armor was scorched, her face was smudged with grease, and she looked more like a queen than she ever had in her silk robes. The main screen flickered, the static clearing to reveal a man sitting on a high-backed command chair. The Regent was handsome in a way that made Kale's skin crawl. He had the same violet skin and bone-ridged crown as Lyris, but his eyes were cold, calculating chips of topaz. He wore a uniform so crisp it looked sharp enough to cut glass, adorned with medals he likely bought rather than earned. Niece, the Regent said. His voice was smooth, a rich baritone that oozed through the bridge speakers. You look terrible. Have you been playing in the dirt? Lyris stepped forward, her chin high. Uncle, I see you brought an audience to your treason, the Regent chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. Treason is such a fluid concept. Lyris, I prefer to call it sanitation. You have been missing for 3 days. We feared the worst. And now, to find you here, aboard a cursed relic, held hostage by a primitive scavenger. It breaks my heart. The Regent's gaze shifted to Kale. He looked at the human with the bored expression of a man inspecting a stain on his boot. Mr. Kale, I presume. The dossier says you are a man of practical needs, discharged without honors, scavenging for scraps. I have a proposition. Kale crossed his arms, leaning back against the console with a casual arrogance he did not feel. I am listening. But I charge by the minute. The regent smiled. Surrender the girl. She is unstable, contaminated by the psychic leakage of that cursed vessel. She is a danger to herself and the Dominion. Hand her over, and I will transfer 5 million credits to an account of your choosing. You can buy a new ship. You can buy a new life. You can disappear. 5 million, Kyle repeated. He looked at Lyris. That is a lot of zeros. Princess. Lyris looked at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw the calculation in his eyes, the weariness of a man who had been broke and hungry for a decade. For a second, she was terrified. Then Kale turned back to the screen. You know, that is a generous offer. Kale drawled, really. It would cover my bar tab. But here's the thing about scavengers. Regent, we know the difference between trash and treasure, and I don't sell passengers to snakes in fancy suits. The Regent's smile did not waver, but his eyes hardened. A poor choice. Mr. Kale. Also, Kale added, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. Your breath smells like a lie even through the vacuum of space. Lyris let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. A fierce, wild thrill shot through her. He had refused. He had looked at a fortune and chosen her. She felt exasperated by his reckless antagonism and undeniably overwhelming attracted to his stubborn morality. This discussion is over, Lyris said, stepping in front of Kale. We know the truth. Uncle, we know about the massacre at Orav. We know the Zenith's wound was not destroyed by enemies. It was used to test a bioweapon on our own people. The Regent waved a hand dismissively. Old stories, myths. No one cares about history. Lyris, they care about stability, and I provide that. You provide only questions. I have the data, Lyris challenged. The ship's logs are intact. I will broadcast them to the galaxy. The Regent leaned forward. The charm evaporated. You will do no such thing. That ship is a cancer. I am the surgeon. He gestured to someone off-screen. All ships, the Regent commanded. Target the Zenith's wound. Vaporize it. I want nothing left but dust. The transmission cut. The screen went black. Well, Kale said into the silence. I think that went well. I really nailed the insult part. Lyris turned to him. There was no fear in her eyes anymore, only a blazing determination. We need to broadcast, she said. Now. Objection. The ship's voice boomed. Transmitter array is damaged. Range is limited. The jamming signal from the fleet is overwhelming. Can you break through? Kale asked. Not in my current state. My processing cores are fractured. The trauma loops consume 80% of my bandwidth. The ship's lights pulsed red. I require unification. I require a conduit to focus my will. What kind of conduit? Lyris asked. A neural link, direct interface with the bloodline. I need to borrow your mind, daughter of Zephyr. I need you to navigate the trauma and guide me. Lyris paled. A neural link with a psychotic, haunted AI? It was suicide. It was one step short of possession. If I do this, Lyris whispered, will I come back? Probability uncertain. We don't have a choice, Kale said, watching the tactical display. The cruisers are charging weapons. We have maybe 10 minutes before the shields fail. Lyris looked at the metal tendrils hanging from the ceiling in the center of the bridge, the interface harness. Prepare the link, she told the ship. Initializing. 5 minutes to sync. Kale grabbed her arm. Lyris, wait. He pulled her away from the center of the bridge, dragging her into a small, dimly lit control alcove shielded by a bank of servers. The roar of the engines was muffled here. It was a pocket of shadow in the chaos. He looked at her, his hands gripping her shoulders. You don't have to do this, he said. We can run. There are escape pods. They would shoot us down in seconds, she said, and the truth would die with us. She looked up at him. Her golden eyes were shimmering with unshed tears. I am terrified. Kyle, she confessed. Her voice was small, stripped of all royal pretense. Not of dying. I am terrified of losing myself. The ship, it is an ocean of pain. If I go in there, I might dissolve. I might forget who I am. Kyle's hands tightened on her shoulders. He stepped closer, crowding her against the server bank. I won't let you forget, he said fiercely. I will be right here. I will pull you out. You cannot save me from my own mind, she said. I can try, he said. He looked at her, really looked at her, the dirt on her cheek, the exhaustion in her posture, the terrifying beauty of her alien features. He realized, with a sudden, sinking clarity, that he was not just protecting a mission anymore, he was protecting his heart. I have spent 10 years pushing people away, Kyle whispered. I thought if I didn't care, I couldn't be hurt again. But you crashed into my life and wrecked everything. I am sorry. She managed a weak smile. Don't be, he said. I am terrified too. Laris, I am terrified that if you go into that machine, I will be alone again. And I don't think I can go back to being alone, not after you. The air in the alcove felt suddenly thin. The alarms from the bridge were muffled, distant. There was only the heat of their bodies and the hum of the servers. Lyris reached up, her fingers trembling as she touched the rough stubble on his cheek. Then give me something to remember, she whispered. Give me an anchor. Kyle didn't hesitate. He leaned down. She rose to meet him. The kiss was not like in the stories. It was not graceful. It was a collision. It was desperate, fueled by the adrenaline of impending death and the starving need of two lonely souls finding solace. Kale's lips were rough, tasting of recycled air and salt. Lyris tasted like ozone and static electricity. She made a sound in her throat, a soft, needy whimper that shattered Kale's restraint. He groaned, his hands tangling in the bone ridges of her crown, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. She clung to him, her fingers digging into the back of his survival suit. She needed to feel him, the solid, warm reality of him. She needed to know that she was not just a symbol, not just a bloodline, not just a ghost in the making. She was a woman. She was alive. The kiss deepened, becoming fierce, a battle for breath. Kyle walked her backward until she hit the wall, his body pressing against hers, hard and demanding. Kale. She breathed against his mouth. He murmured her name like a prayer. Lyris. His hands found the clasps of her ceremonial armor. Her hands found the zippers of his flight suit. There was no elegance, only urgency. They were two people standing on the edge of a cliff, deciding to jump together. In the half-light of the alcove, with the universe ending outside, they claimed each other. Later, the silence in the alcove felt heavy, but it was a good weight. They were huddled together on the floor, wrapped in Kale's heavy flight jacket. The air was cooling as the ship diverted power to the shields, but between them, the warmth lingered. Lyris rested her head on Kale's chest, tracing the line of an old plasma burn on his collarbone with her finger. I never knew, she whispered. Knew what? Kale asked, his voice rasping. He was stroking her arm, his thumb running over the bioluminescent markings that were now glowing with a soft, steady pulse. That I could be wanted, she said. For myself. In the court, I was a key, a genetic sequence, a marriage prospect. When you looked at me just now, you did not see a princess. You saw me. I saw the woman who tried to stab me with a glow stick 5 minutes after waking up. Kale teased gently. That was the moment I knew I was in trouble. She chuckled, the sound vibrating against his ribs. It feels forbidden, she admitted. A human and a Zephyrian. My ancestors would be rolling in their crypts. Let them roll, Kale said. They are the ones who built the monsters. We are the ones cleaning up the mess. He tightened his arm around her. I was ashamed, Lyris. For a long time, after Aurelius, I felt like I was broken, like I wasn't a soldier anymore, just a coward who couldn't pull the trigger. But being with you, seeing you fight for the truth, it makes me feel like I can forgive the man I was. Lyris looked up at him. Her golden eyes were clear. You are not a coward, Kale. You are the bravest man I have ever known. She sat up, pulling the jacket tighter around herself. We have a future, she said firmly. I do not know what it looks like. I do not know if we will be outlaws or heroes, but I know I want you in it. However impossible that seems, Kale asked. Especially because it is impossible, she answered. Sink preparation complete. The ship interrupted. Time is elastic, but my shields are not. The enemy is firing. The ship shuddered violently. A distant explosion rocked the hull. It is time, Lyris said. She stood up, adjusting her disheveled clothing with a dignity that returned instantly. She offered a hand to Kale. He took it. They walked back onto the bridge hand in hand. The view screen was awash of laser fire. The shields were holding, but barely. Lyris stepped into the center of the interface circle. Ready, she said. The ceiling opened. Tendrils of living metal, like silver ivy, descended. They writhed in the air, seeking her. Kyle stepped close. He held her hand until the tendrils began to wrap around her wrists, her waist, her temples. Remember, he said, you are Lyris. I am Lyris, she repeated. The metal covered her eyes. She gasped as the needles slid into her neural ports. Her back arched. Kale's fingers slipped from hers as she was lifted off the deck, suspended in the web of the ship. Her consciousness slammed into a wall of white light. She was gone. She was in the ocean, inside the mindscape. There was no up or down. There was only memory. Lyris stood in a corridor that stretched for infinity, but the walls were made of screaming faces. Why did you leave us? A voice wept. Why did you burn us? She walked forward. The psychic pressure was immense, a crushing weight of grief. She saw the crew of the Zenith's wound dying over and over again. She felt their terror as the bioweapon backfired. She felt the Admiral's shame. It would be so easy to drown here, she thought, to let the sorrow sweep her away. But she felt a tether, a warm golden thread tied to her heart. I won't let you forget. I am here. She spoke to the storm. I am the witness. She reached out, touching the spectral images. I see you, she told a weeping ensign. I know your name. You are not forgotten. She walked through the fire of the memory, calming the storm. The screaming lessened. The chaos began to organize. Then she faced the wall of ancestors. Huge, towering statues of her family blocked her path. They looked down with disdain. Silence, child. Her father's voice boomed. Stability is worth any lie. Bury the truth. Save the Empire. Lyris looked up at the giants. The Empire is a graveyard, she shouted. You built your throne on bones. She raised her hand. The mental avatar of her ceremonial blade appeared in her grip. I am not your daughter anymore, she declared. I am the sword of truth. She slashed the air. The statues shattered, crumbling into dust. Behind them lay the core processor, the terrified child mind of the ship. It was huddled in the dark, weeping. They will hurt me, the ship whimpered. No, Lyra said, kneeling beside it. We will hurt them. We will show them everything. She placed her hands on the core. Now! She screamed. In the physical world, the Zenith's wound screamed. It was not a sound of pain. It was a data shriek. From the ship's transmitter array, a beam of pure information blasted out. It punched through the Regent's jamming signal like a bullet through glass. It hit the Sovereign, it hit the cruisers. It hit every relay buoy in the sector. On the bridge of the Regent's dreadnought, every screen turned black. Then, the video began to play. The massacre at Orav, the worms, the firing order signed by the royal family, the subsequent cover-up. It was playing on the tactical consoles. It was playing on the soldiers' data pads. It was playing on the comms. Broadcast successful. The ship roared. The galaxy is watching. On the Zenith's wound. Kale didn't have time to celebrate. Intruder alert. Bridge access. The door to the bridge blew inward. Smoke filled the room. Through the haze, a squad of Blackwing commandos charged in. They weren't there to capture anymore. They were there to kill the princess before the broadcast could finish. Kale racked the slide of his rail driver. Not today, he yelled. He opened fire. He took down the point man with a shot to the chest. He rolled behind the captain's chair as plasma bolts chewed up the console. He checked Lyris. She was suspended in the air, her body twitching as the data streamed through her. She was defenseless. Kale popped up, firing 2 controlled bursts. Another mercenary went down. But there were too many. They were flanking him. Computer, Kale shouted. Do we have gravity control? Localized gravity is available. Kale grinned. It was a manic, desperate grin. Drop the base! He slammed his fist onto the manual override panel. Gravity on the bridge reversed instantly. The mercenaries, caught off guard, floated up toward the ceiling, flailing and screaming. Kale, anticipating the shift, had hooked his boots under the heavy console. He stayed anchored. He aimed upward. It was like shooting fish in a barrel, a floating, screaming barrel. He picked them off one by one. One mercenary managed to grab a ceiling strut and aimed his rifle at Lyris's suspended body. Kale didn't have a clear shot. He unhooked his boots. He kicked off the console, flying through the air like a swimmer pushing off a wall. He tackled the mercenary in midair. They spun together in 0G, grappling for the weapon. Kale smashed his helmet into the mercenary's faceplate. The glass cracked. Kale ripped the oxygen hose loose. The mercenary choked and went limp. Kale pushed off the ceiling, drifting back down toward the console just as gravity slammed back to normal. He hit the deck hard, rolling to absorb the impact. He groaned, checking his ribs. Definitely cracked. He looked up at Lyris. She was still suspended. But something was wrong. The metal tendrils were turning black. Her body was arching in a rictus of pain. She was screaming, a sound that bypassed her vocal cords and echoed directly in Kale's mind. Lyris! Kale shouted, scrambling toward her. Inside the mindscape, the victory had turned to ash. Lyris had released the truth, but in opening the deep archives, she had woken the oldest ghost. The floor of the mental corridor dissolved into sludge. From the darkness below, it rose, the worm. But this was not the biological beast from the moon. This was the psychic imprint of the hunger. It was a colossal, rotting manifestation of the guilt the ship had carried for 50 years. It was made of eyes and mouths and the memories of the eaten. It towered over Lyris's mental avatar. You opened the door. The entity roared. Its voice was the sound of bones breaking. Now I am hungry. It did not want to eat her flesh. It wanted to eat her mind. It wanted to consume the sanity of the ship and the pilot. A sacrifice, the worm demanded. Give me a soul to fill the void, or I take everything. Lyris stood before the monster. She was tiny, insignificant against the scale of the horror. She felt the ship's mind crumbling around her. The broadcast had drained its defenses. It had nothing left to fight with. The worm lunged. The mindscape was not silent. It roared with the sound of 1 billion burning cities. Lyra stood on a platform of obsidian glass floating in a void of screaming static. Above her, the sky was a bruised purple bruise, bleeding data like rain. And rising from the ocean of memory beneath the platform was the entity. It was the worm. But it was not the biological beast she had faced on the moon. This was a monstrosity of concept and guilt. Its scales were made of the weeping faces of the dead. Its teeth were jagged shards of broken ship hulls. It did not smell of ozone and rot, but of shame. A thick, oily scent that coated the back of her throat and made her want to gag. "You are small," the entity boomed. The entity. Its voice was a chorus of the drowned, vibrating in her marrow. "You are a speck of dust trying to hold back a tidal wave." Lyra stood her ground, though her mental avatar felt fragile, like a paper doll in a hurricane. She held the image of her ceremonial blade in her hand, but it flickered, unstable against the crushing psychic pressure. "I am not afraid of you," Lyra said, though her voice sounded thin. "You are just a recording. You are a ghost story my family told to keep people obedient." The entity laughed, and the sound shattered the glass at her feet. "We are not a story," it hissed. "We are the truth you buried. Look at you. You have the same bone ridges as the man who ordered the fire. You have the same violet eyes as the woman who signed the death warrants. You are meat from the same butcher shop." The entity lunged, a massive coil of memory striking her. Lyra gasped as the vision hit her. It was not a physical blow, it was an immersion. Suddenly, she was the gunner on the Zenith's wound 50 years ago. She felt the cold button under her thumb. She felt the detachment, the order barking in her headset. She felt the vibration of the pod launching. Then, the crushing, soul-destroying realization as the screams began to filter back through the sensors. "See," the entity whispered in her ear. It felt good to obey. It felt safe. "You want to be safe, little princess. You want to close your eyes and let the Regent handle the messy parts." "No," Lyra gritted out, forcing herself back to the surface of the vision. She pushed back. She summoned a memory of her own, not of war, but of the last few hours. She thought of Cale pulling her from the sand. She thought of his hand in hers, rough and warm. She thought of the way he looked at her, not as a symbol, but as a person. "I am not them," she shouted. She projected the image of Cale standing between her and the maw of the worm on the moon. She projected the feeling of his heartbeat against her back in the freezing maintenance booth. "Kindness exists," she told the monster. "Resistance exists." The entity recoiled, hissing as the golden light of her memory burned its skin of shadows. "Kindness is a weakness," the entity snarled. "It dies, just like the scavenger will die, in the physical world." Cale was doing his best to prove the monster wrong, but it was getting harder by the second. He was currently pinned behind a bulkhead in Sector 4, reloading his magnetic rail driver with fingers that felt like numb sausages. His left side was on fire. A glancing blow from a plasma bolt had melted the armor of his survival suit and seared the skin over his ribs. Every breath was a jagged knife twisting in his chest. "System status," Cale yelled, popping up to fire a suppression burst down the corridor. The ship's voice crackled in his earpiece. It was the child fragment again, giggling nervously. "Bad men are coming, Mr. Scavenger. They have big guns." "Yeah, I noticed," Cale grunted, ducking as a chunk of the wall above his head vaporized into molten slag. "Can you give me a hand here? Maybe vent some steam?" Close a door? I can't, the child voice whispered. The princess is using all the power. She is fighting the big bad thing. I am just watching. Well, don't just watch. Kale wheezed, checking his ammo counter. 3 rounds left. Great. Root for the idiot with the gun. Okay? Go, idiot. The AI cheered. Kyle let out a dry, pained laugh. Thanks, kid. He checked his tactical map. The core chamber was 200 meters away. He had to get there. Lyris was suspended in the interface harness, defenseless. If the Regent's death squads reached her before she finished the broadcast, it was all over. He heard the heavy boots of the Blackwing mercenaries advancing. They weren't rushing anymore. They were moving with the slow, methodical confidence of executioners. Kale gripped his rifle. He wiped the sweat and blood from his eyes. Over my dead body, he whispered to himself, repeating the promise he had made on the moon. He broke cover and ran. Outside the hull of the Zenith's wound, the silence of space was filling with chaos. The broadcast Lyris had unleashed was not a subtle stream of data. It was a sledgehammer. It had overridden the encryption protocols of every ship in the blockade. On the bridge of the heavy cruiser, Ethelgard, Captain Valerius stared at his main screen. He was a veteran of the border wars, a man who had served the Dominion for 40 years with unquestioning loyalty. But now, he was watching a recording of a massacre. He saw the bioweapons, he heard the screaming colonists, and at the bottom of the screen, burning like a brand, was the digital signature of the royal seal. Captain? His comms officer asked, her voice trembling. The Sovereign is hailing us. The Regent is ordering us to fire on the target. Valerius looked at the Zenith's wound, the burning ancient ship that had just told them the truth. Then he looked at the Sovereign, the pristine golden dreadnought of the man who had buried that truth. Sir, the officer pressed. Weapons are charged. Belay that order, Valerius said quietly. Sir, I said belay that order, Valerius roared. We are not firing. The comms channel exploded with chatter. It wasn't just the Ethelgard. Across the blockade, ships were drifting out of formation. Some captains were cutting their engines. Others were turning their turrets away from the Zenith's wound. This is treason, the Regent's voice screamed over the fleet-wide channel. I will have you all executed. Fire, damn you. On the Ethelgard, Captain Valerius keyed his mic. Regent, this is Valerius. We have seen the logs. We are standing down. You are dead men, the Regent shrieked. The Sovereign turned its massive turret batteries, not toward the Zenith's wound, toward the Ethelgard. Captain, incoming fire from the flagship. Raise shields, Valerius shouted, and signal the rest of the fleet. The Regent has gone rogue. The blockade dissolved into a civil war in the span of 30 seconds. Green and blue lance beams crossed the darkness as ships chose sides. Back in the mindscape, Lyris did not know she was winning the war outside. She only knew she was losing the war inside. The worm entity had grown. It now towered over her, a skyscraper of writhing agony. It had stopped attacking her with visions and started attacking her with logic. The galaxy does not want the truth, the entity rumbled. It wants peace. If you release this pain, you will break the Dominion. Billions will suffer in the chaos. And is that what you want, Princess? To be the Queen of Ashes? I want the killing to stop, Lyris cried, shielding her eyes from the psychic glare. Then take it, the entity offered. It opened its chest, revealing a black hole of pure, concentrated trauma. Take the curse into yourself, become the vessel. If you absorb the memory, the ship will be clean, the ghosts will sleep. You can be the martyr. You can save everyone by suffering alone. Lyris looked into the abyss. It was tempting. It was so incredibly tempting. To end the conflict, to be the savior, To let Kale and the ship go free, paid for by her own eternal silence. I accept, Lyris whispered. She stepped toward the entity. Excellent. The monster purred. The pain hit her before she even touched it. It was a white-hot spike driving into her brain. She felt her identity beginning to dissolve, stripping away Lyris the woman and leaving only Lyris the container. She fell to her knees on the obsidian glass. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. The darkness was swallowing her. Lyris, the voice did not come from the entity. It did not come from her memory, that it came from the tether. Don't you dare. Kyle's voice rang out, clear and furious in her mind. Lyris looked up, gasping. I know what you are doing, Kyle said, his voice straining with physical effort. You are trying to be the hero. You are trying to jump on the grenade. It is the only way. Lyris wept mentally. I have to carry it. That is a lie, Kyle shouted. That is just another form of arrogance. Lyris, thinking you are the only one strong enough to bleed. We are partners, remember? But the weight, Lyris stammered. It is too heavy. Then we share it, Kale said. We don't bury it in one person. That is what your family did. They hid the poison. We pour it out. Lyris froze. We pour it out. She looked at the entity. She looked at the black hole of guilt. You lied to me, Lyris said, standing up. Her voice was stronger now. It vibrated with the harmonic resonance of the ship's engines. You told me I had to hide the truth to save the world. But the truth isn't heavy because it is big. It is heavy because we carry it alone. She raised her hands. I reject your bargain, Lyris declared. She grabbed the black hole. She didn't absorb it. She turned it inside out. The ship will not be a tomb, she commanded. It will be a library. She slammed her hands onto the obsidian floor. Rewrite protocol, she screamed. The mindscape shattered. The obsidian glass exploded into 1 billion shards of light. The worm entity shrieked as it was torn apart. It dissolved, not into nothingness, but into data. Every scream, every memory, every crime was converted into a file, a record, a history lesson. The darkness vanished. The purple sky turned a calm, deep blue. The entity was gone. In its place stood a simple, glowing orb of light. The ship's AI. Thank you, the AI said. Its voice was no longer a child or an admiral or a seductress. It was one voice, melancholy, ancient, but sane. We are no longer cursed, the AI said. We are witnesses, and you are my keepers. Lyris opened her eyes in the physical world. She was still suspended in the harness on the bridge, but the pain was gone. She felt light, lighter than she had felt in her entire life. But the room was filled with smoke and the smell of burnt ozone. Kale, she screamed. She ripped the interface needles from her temples, ignoring the trickle of blood. The harness released her, and she dropped to the deck. She scrambled up and looked toward the door. Kyle was there. But he wasn't standing. He was on his knees, surrounded by 4 members of the Regent's elite guard. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds. His rifle lay in pieces on the floor. One of the guards had a plasma blade pressed against Kale's throat. The guard looked at Lyris. Don't move, princess, the guard sneered, or your pet scavenger loses his head. Kale looked up at her. One of his eyes was swollen shut. His mouth was full of blood. He grinned. Hey, he rasped. You woke up? Did we win? Lyris looked at the guards. She felt the ship humming around her, not as a prison but as an extension of her own body. She felt the bulkheads, the gravity plates, the atmospheric vents. She didn't need a weapon. She was the weapon. Get away from him, Lyris said. Her voice was low, but it carried the weight of a dreadnought. The guard laughed. I said, don't move. Lyris twitched her finger. The gravity in the room didn't just shift, it localized. The 4 guards were suddenly slammed into the ceiling with the force of a hydraulic press. Their armor crunched. They stuck there, pinned helplessly against the metal plating. Kyle, who was kneeling on the floor, didn't move an inch. Lyris walked over to him. She knelt down, ignoring the groans of the men on the ceiling. She cupped Kale's face in her hands. We won, she whispered. Kale leaned into her touch. That is good, he murmured, because I think I broke my everything. Before Lyris could respond, a shimmering column of light appeared in the center of the bridge. Teleportation signature. Lyris spun around, placing herself between Kale and the light. The Regent stepped out of the beam. He looked frantic. His perfect uniform was disheveled. He was holding a disruptor pistol, his eyes darting around the bridge like a trapped rat. He saw the guards pinned to the ceiling. He saw Lyris. He saw Kale. You, the Regent spat. You ruined everything. The fleet is in mutiny. The houses are calling for my head. Lyris stood tall. It is over. Uncle, the truth is out. There is nowhere left to hide. The Regent raised the pistol, aiming it at Lyris's chest. I don't need to hide, he snarled. I just need to kill the witnesses. If I kill you, I can claim it was a rebel boarding party, and I can spin this. I can still win. He was delusional. The power had cracked his mind just as the guilt had cracked the ship. Drop the weapon, Kale said, trying to stand up. He stumbled, clutching his side. Stay down, scavenger, the Regent shouted. He tightened his finger on the trigger. Lyris didn't flinch. Ship, she said calmly. Spotlight. The walls of the bridge seemed to dissolve. Every screen, every surface turned into a mirror. But they weren't reflecting the bridge. They were transmitting. Lyris had linked the bridge's visual feed to the fleet-wide broadcast. Regent, Lyris said, her voice amplified by the ship's comms. You are live. The Regent froze. He looked at the screens. He saw himself, sweaty, desperate, pointing a gun at his unarmed niece. He saw the feed count. Billions of viewers. The entire Dominion. Smile, Uncle, Lyris said coldly. You are making history. The Regent lowered the gun slightly, his face twisting in horror. He realized what she had done. She hadn't just defeated him, she had exposed him. He was naked before the galaxy. The comms channel erupted with voices from the fleet. This is Admiral Harkon. Regent, surrender immediately. This is the Ethel Guard. We are locking onto your teleport signal. Stand down. The Regent looked at the comms panel. He looked at Lyris. The realization of his total defeat turned into a blind, animal rage. If I burn, the Regent screamed, raising the gun again. You burn with me. He fired. The bolt of red energy struck Lyris in the chest. Kyle screamed, but Lyris didn't fall. The air around her shimmered. The Zenith's wound had diverted every ounce of its shield power to a personal kinetic barrier around its keeper. The plasma bolt splashed harmlessly against the air, dissipating into sparks. The ship roared. Threat detected. Neutralizing. A panel in the floor opened. A maintenance tentacle, thick as a tree trunk, whipped out. It wrapped around the Regent's waist and slammed him into the wall. He dropped the gun, gasping for air. Kale scrambled across the floor. He grabbed the fallen disruptor pistol. He staggered to his feet, leveling the weapon at the Regent's head. The Regent hung there, pinned by the ship, wheezing. He looked at Kale. He saw the murder in the scavenger's eyes. Do it! The Regent wheezed. End it. Show them you are just a thug. Kale's finger tightened on the trigger. He wanted to do it. He wanted to burn this man who had ordered the death of planets, who had hunted them like animals, who had tried to kill the woman he loved. Every instinct in his soldier's brain screamed, kill. Lyris put her hand on Kale's arm. Kale, she said softly. He deserves it. Kale snarled. Yes, she agreed. He does. But if you kill him now, he becomes a martyr to the fanatics. He becomes a victim. She looked at the regent with a look of utter pity. Let him live. Kale. Let him stand trial. Let the galaxy see him small and broken in a cage. That is a punishment worse than death for a man like him. Kale looked at Lyris. He saw the strength in her eyes. She was right. Killing him was the easy way out. It was the worm's way. He lowered the gun. You are lucky, Kale told the regent. She has better morals than I do. He pistol-whipped the regent across the face, knocking him unconscious. I said I wouldn't kill him, Kale muttered. I didn't say I wouldn't hit him. Moments later, the teleporter chimed again. This time, it was a boarding party from the Ethel Guard, Marines in Dominion armor, but wearing armbands of white cloth, the sign of the truce. They took the regent into custody. They cut down the guards Lyris had pinned to the ceiling. The lead Marine saluted Lyris. Your Highness, he said, his voice filled with awe. The fleet awaits your command. Lyris looked at the Marine. Then she looked at the starfield outside, where the firing had stopped. The Civil War had ended before it truly began, strangled by the truth. I am not your commander, Lyris said. I am just a witness. An hour later, the Zenith's wound was quiet. The battle was over. Kale sat in the medical bay, wincing as a robotic arm sutured the cut on his forehead. His ribs were taped, and he had pumped enough painkillers into his system to stun a horse. Lyris walked in. She had cleaned the soot from her face, though she still wore her battered armor. How is the patient? She asked. I will live, Kyle grumbled, though I think the ship enjoyed sticking me with that needle a little too much. Lyris smiled. She sat on the edge of the biobed. The regent is in the brig of the Ethel Guard, she said. The High Council has convened. They are already drafting a new constitution. They want me to return to the capital. They want me to lead the transition. Kale looked at her. His stomach dropped. Of course, he said, trying to keep his voice neutral. You are the hero, the queen who saved the soul of the Empire. They need you. Lyris looked down at her hands. They do, she said. I could do a lot of good, Kyle. I could ensure the reforms stick. I could rebuild the Dominion into something decent. Kale looked away. He felt the old loneliness creeping back in. Well, he said, it was a hell of a ride, Princess. Lyris reached out and took his hand. But there is another option, she said. Kale looked back at her. The Zenith's wound, she said, it is fully operational. And it has made a declaration. It is leaving Dominion space. It is going to the Outer Rim, to the Wild Zones. It wants to find the other lost ships. It wants to be a sanctuary for the forgotten. She squeezed his hand. It needs a pilot, Kale, and it needs a keeper. Kale's heart skipped a beat. You would walk away, he asked, from the throne, from the power. I told you, Lyris said, leaning closer. I don't want to be a symbol. I want to be me. And me is the woman who fell in love with a stubborn scavenger in a haunted tin can. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that lit up the sterile room. Besides, she added, I can't let you wander the galaxy alone. You have terrible taste in music. Kale laughed. It hurt his ribs, but he didn't care. He pulled her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. So, he said, where do we go first? Lyris looked at the display on the wall, showing the infinite map of the stars. Anywhere we want, she said. The silence of the Zenith's wound was no longer the silence of a held breath. It was the deep, resonant stillness of a cathedral after the bells had stopped ringing. For days, the ship had drifted toward the edge of the charted systems, riding the magnetic currents of the outer rim. The transformation of the vessel had been slow, almost biological, like a wound knitting itself shut. The jagged, pulsing red lights that had once made the corridors look like arterial veins had softened into a steady, warm gold. The walls, which had previously groaned and shifted with the erratic heartbeat of a fractured mind, now hummed with a low, harmonious vibration. Cale walked down the central promenade of Deck 7. He remembered running through this hallway with a rail driver in his hands, terrified that the floor would turn into a mouth. Now, the floor was solid, polished obsidian that reflected the soft overhead lights. He stopped at one of the memorial alcoves. Before, these niches had been horror shows, projecting the screaming final seconds of the crew on an endless loop. Now, the holograms were static, dignified portraits, names, ranks, and dates of birth scrolled gently beneath them. He saw the face of the young ensign whose ghost had wept in the walls. The boy looked peaceful in the hologram, smiling at a camera that had captured him long before the massacre. "Rest easy, kid," Kyle murmured, touching the edge of the display. He found Lyris on the observation deck. She was standing before the massive viewport, watching the distant stars. She had traded her battered ceremonial armor for a simple flight suit synthesized by the ship's fabricators. It was dark blue, practical, but she wore it with a grace that made it look like royal silk. She was not looking at the stars, Kyle realized as he approached. She was looking at the holographic screens floating in the air around her. They were streaming news feeds from the Dominion. Kale stood beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. He looked at the screens. The galaxy was on fire, but it was the fire of a fever breaking. On one screen, the Regent sat in a containment cell aboard the Ethel Guard. He looked small. The arrogance that had defined him was gone, replaced by a hollow, sunken stare. The ticker tape below him announced the start of the Tribunal of Orav. He was facing charges of high treason, genocide, and crimes against sentient life. On another screen, massive crowds filled the plazas of the capital world. They were not rioting. They were standing in silence, holding candles, a vigil for the victims of the Zenith's wound. And on a third screen, a commentator was debating the legacy of Princess Lyris. "Is she a savior?" the pundit asked. "Or is she the traitor who dismantled the foundation of our society? By exposing the sins of her ancestors, she has delegitimized the entire royal house. Can we trust a leader who burns down her own home?" Lyris swiped her hand through the air, killing the feed. The screens vanished, leaving only the starlight. "They hate me," she said softly. Her voice was not fearful, but it was heavy with exhaustion. "Half of them think I am a hero. The other half thinks I am a monster who destroyed their sense of security." "They are scared, Lyris," Kale said, leaning back against the railing. "You took away the lie that kept them warm at night. People get cranky when you wake them up." "I unleashed chaos," she said. "Look at the protests. Look at the confusion. The markets are crashing. The fleet is paralyzed by internal investigations. Innocent people will suffer because the system is breaking, and innocent people were dying when the system was working." Kyle countered gently. "They were just dying quietly, where no one had to look at them." Lyris turned to him. Her golden eyes were troubled. "I feel guilty," she confessed. "I know we did the right thing. I know the truth had to be told. But looking at the instability, I wonder if my ancestors were right. Maybe peace really is worth any price." Kale shook his head. "That wasn't peace. Lyris, That was just a pause between gunshots. He turned her gently so she was facing him. Listen to me. I was a soldier for 15 years. I saw what happens when you bury the truth to keep things stable. The rot just spreads underneath. You didn't break the dominion. You lanced a boil. It is messy. It hurts. But it is the only way it heals. Lyris looked at his face. She traced the line of his jaw with her eyes. You sound like a philosopher, she noted with a faint smile. I am a scavenger, Cale corrected. I know a thing or two about salvaging good parts from a wreck. He took her hand. Come with me. The ship wants to show us something. What is it? She asked. A surprise. And for once, I don't think it involves a death trap. He led her away from the observation deck, down through the labyrinth of the ship's spine. They descended past the engineering decks, into a section of the hull that had previously been sealed off by the corruption. The door to the bay was not metal. It was a membrane of shimmering force that dissolved as they approached. Lyris stepped through and gasped. It was a garden. The Zenith's wound was a bioship, grown as much as it was built. Now that the trauma had been purged, the ship's creative systems had been unleashed. The vast cargo bay had been transformed into a sanctuary of bioluminescent flora, vines thick as Cale's arm, glowing with a soft turquoise light, spiraled up the support pillars. Flowers the size of dinner plates, with petals like spun glass, floated in hydroponic pools. The air smelled rich and earthy, filtered through thousands of living leaves. Above them, the ceiling was transparent, offering a panoramic view of the nebula they were drifting through. The clouds of cosmic dust outside were pink and violet, mirroring the colors of the alien plants inside. It is beautiful, Lyris whispered, walking into the room. She reached out to touch a fern that curled affectionately around her finger. The ship made it, Kyle said. It is using the biomass reserves. I think it is trying to apologize. Or maybe it is just bored. Lyris laughed, a sound that seemed to make the vines glow brighter. She sat down on a bench formed from a smooth, grown root structure. Kyle sat beside her. The space was quiet, intimate, a world away from the politics and the pain. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the nebula drift by. So, Lyris said, nudging his shoulder with hers, what is the first thing a human scavenger eats when he is not surviving on ration bars? Real meat, Cale said instantly. A steak, cooked over a fire, not synthesized protein paste, and potatoes. Real dirt-grown potatoes. You humans and your root vegetables, Lyris teased. In the palace, we ate food sculptured from light energy and nutrient foam. It was very elegant. And did it taste good? Cale asked. It tasted like nothing, she admitted. It tasted like politeness. Cale chuckled. I will cook for you one day, he promised. It won't be elegant. It will probably be greasy. But it will taste like something. Lyris looked at him. The playfulness in her eyes softened into something deeper. She reached out and touched the scar that ran from his ear to his jaw. It was a jagged white line against his tan skin. Tell me about this one, she said softly. Cale flinched slightly, an instinctive reaction, but he didn't pull away. Shrapnel, he said. A grenade went off in a corridor on Titan. I was lucky. 2 inches to the left and I would be drooling in a jar. She moved her fingers down to his hand, tracing the burn mark across his knuckles. And this? Broken plasma conduit. I was trying to fix an engine on a freighter that was about to explode. I saved the ship, but I lost the skin. She took his hand in both of hers, holding it like a relic. You are a map, she whispered, a map of survival. I am a mess, Kyle corrected. Look at me, Lyris. I am a broke, discharged grunt with more scars than credits. And you are a princess. Even without the throne, you are royalty. You glow in the dark, for God's sake. He looked down, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. I still feel like I am just the guy who drives the taxi. I look at you, and I wonder when you are going to realize you can do better. Lyris gripped his hand tighter. Kale, look at me. He raised his eyes to meet hers. My family, she said, intensity in her voice. They had no scars. Their skin was flawless. They lived in towers of gold and light, and they ordered the death of millions without blinking. They were perfect, and they were hollow. She leaned in, her face inches from his. I do not want perfection. I want the man who stood in front of a giant worm. I want the man who held me when I was breaking apart. I want the man who knows what it costs to survive and chooses to be kind anyway. That is not worth. Kyle, she whispered against his lips. That is a miracle. Kale felt the last of his defenses crumble. The walls he had built around his heart, the cynicism, the humor, the distance, turned to dust. He reached up and cupped her face. Her skin was cool and smooth, the bone ridges of her crown hard under his thumbs. You are dangerous. Princess, he murmured. You make me want to believe in things again. Good, she said. Start with us. She kissed him. It was not the desperate, frantic collision of the control alcove. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was a question asked and answered in the language of breath and touch. Kale pulled her closer, shifting so she was straddling his lap on the bench. The bioluminescent vines cast shifting shadows over them, painting their skin in shades of teal and indigo. Lyris sighed into his mouth, a sound of pure surrender. She felt the roughness of his hands on her waist, the solid warmth of his body beneath hers. It grounded her. It tethered her floating soul to the physical world. They moved together with a reverence that bordered on worship. Every touch was a promise. Every kiss was a seal on the bond they had forged in the fire, in the quiet sanctuary of the garden, surrounded by the ghosts of the past transformed into flowers. They stripped away the titles and the trauma. There was no princess. There was no scavenger. There were just two survivors, finding a home in each other's arms. The nebula watched through the glass as they sank into the shadows, the light of the stars dim compared to the fire between them. Later, they lay tangled together on a bed of soft moss the ship had grown in the corner of the garden. Kale's flight jacket was draped over them like a blanket. Lyris rested her head on Kale's shoulder, watching the slow rotation of the galaxy outside. I learned something, she murmured, her voice sleepy and content. Yeah? Kyle asked, running his hand absently along the curve of her spine. What did you learn? That human anatomy is surprisingly comfortable? That too. She smiled against his skin, but I meant about the silence. She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. My family thought silence was a shield. They thought if they didn't speak of the darkness, it couldn't touch them. But silence is a weapon. It is the most deadly weapon in the arsenal. It kills slowly. It rots you from the inside. Kale nodded slowly. We had a saying in the Corps. He said, rust never sleeps. Lies are like rust. You can paint over them, but the metal keeps eating itself until the whole structure collapses. Lyris kissed his chest, right over his heart. And I learned about love, she said. Oh? Kyle raised an eyebrow. Do tell. I thought love was a weakness, she admitted, a vulnerability, something that could be used against you. But when I was in the machine, when the entity tried to swallow me, It wasn't my royal blood that saved me. It was you. It was knowing you were there. Love doesn't erase the pain, Kale said quietly. We still carry the ghosts, Laris. I still dream about Aurelius. You will still dream about the worm. I know, she said. Love doesn't erase the pain, but it gives you the strength to carry it. It makes the burden bearable because you aren't lifting it alone. She looked at him with fierce clarity. Choosing you, choosing a human, a scavenger, it is an act of rebellion. It is a declaration that the old rules don't apply anymore. Kyle smiled, pulling her down for a soft kiss. I always liked being a rebel, he said. The air in the garden shimmered. A soft chime echoed through the leaves. Interruption, the ship's voice announced. It was polite, almost apologetic. I am pleased that your biological interface rituals were successful. However, we are approaching the navigational threshold. Lyra sat up, pulling the jacket around her shoulders. She didn't feel embarrassed. She felt whole. What threshold? She asked. The edge of Dominion space. The ship replied. I require new parameters. I cannot remain static. A holographic projection appeared in the center of the garden. It showed the galaxy. It showed the borders of the Dominion and the vast unmapped dark of the wild zones. I was built to be a weapon, the AI said. Then I became a prison. I do not wish to be either anymore. I wish to be an archive. An archive? Kale asked, sitting up. I contain the truth of the war. I contain the memories of the dead. I wish to travel to the places erased by history. I wish to offer sanctuary to those displaced by conflict. I will be a witness. The ship paused. But a ship cannot be a witness alone. I require a crew. I require guardians of memory. Lyris and Kale looked at each other. The offer hung in the air. Guardians of Memory, Lyris repeated, and it was a heavy title. But it fit. The ship continued. The Dominion is hailing us. The new council requests the return of Princess Lyris to serve as head of state. They promise reform. Kale watched Lyris closely. This was the moment. The path back to the palace was open. She could go back. She could be the queen she was born to be. Lyris looked at the holographic map. She looked at the blinking light of the capital world. If I go back, she said slowly, I will be trapped. I will spend the rest of my life in meetings, debating trade tariffs and fighting with bureaucrats who want to water down the truth. I will be a symbol again. She looked at Kale. But if we run, if we just disappear, then we are abandoning the people who need us. So we find a middle path, Kale said. He stood up, pulling her with him. You don't have to be the queen to lead. Lyris, you can be the conscience. He turned to the ship's censor. Ship, send a reply to the council. Tell them Princess Lyris declines the throne. Tell them she abdicates all claims to power. Lyris nodded, her voice gaining strength. Tell them I will serve as an independent advisor. I will monitor their reforms. I will hold them accountable. But I will do it from here. The Zenith's wound is neutral ground. It belongs to no faction. It belongs to the truth. Parameters accepted, the ship said, and the scavenger? Kale grinned. I am not a scavenger anymore. I am the pilot, and I am the escort. He looked at Lyris. Someone has to make sure the princess doesn't get into trouble. Very well, the ship said. Course set for the nebula, leaving Dominion space. They dressed in the quiet of the garden and made their way to the bridge. The transition was smooth. The massive engines of the Zenith's wound pushed them forward, not with the violent lurch of a warship, but with the steady, powerful glide of a leviathan. They stood at the main viewport, fingers intertwined, Ahead of them, the nebula was a wall of color, swirls of gold, violet, and deep crimson. It was the frontier, the unknown. Behind them, the Dominion was fading into a cluster of distant stars. "It feels strange," Lyris said, "leaving it all behind." "We aren't leaving it behind," Kyle said. "We are just getting a better vantage point." He squeezed her hand. "We have a lot of work to do, you know. There are a lot of lost ships out there, a lot of ghosts that need someone to listen to them." "I am ready," Lyris said. She turned to him, her eyes sparkling with a mischief that had been absent for too long. "You know," she said, leaning against his shoulder, "no fortune-teller in the galaxy could have predicted this. A lost alien princess falling for a stubborn human scavenger inside a cursed starship." "It sounds like bad fiction," Kale laughed. "It is terrible fiction," he agreed. "No one would believe it." He looked out at the swirling clouds of the nebula. "If I ever see another giant worm," Kale said, his face deadpan, "I am running the other way. I don't care if it threatens the fabric of reality. I am taking a vacation." Lyris smiled, resting her head on his chest. "You say that," she whispered. "But I know the truth, and what truth is that?" She looked up at him, her love shining as bright as the stars outside, "that you would still step between me and the monster every single time." Kale looked down at her. He saw the woman who had saved his soul. He saw the future stretching out before them, dangerous and beautiful and completely theirs. "Yeah," he whispered, leaning down to kiss her. "Over my dead body." Their lips met as the Zenith's wound slipped into the nebula, vanishing from the maps of men and entering the legend of the stars. They were no longer lost. They were found. And for the first time in 100 years, the ship was not screaming. It was singing.